Chess YouTube, this right here might be the single greatest comeback game of Magnus Carlsen's entire career. And trust me, I know what I'm talking about here. I've analyzed hundreds of his games on this channel alone. I am going to milk Magnus dry for all that he's worth. I'm getting every last view that I can from this guy. And trust me, this game is the best comeback game I have ever seen from the GOAT. All right, his opponent in this game, who also needs no introduction, Daniel Naroditsky, the speed demon and longtime rival of Magnus. In this game, he goes 1c5, heading for his favorite Najdorf Sicilian. Now we have knight f3, d6, d4, the open Sicilian, then c takes, knight f6, knight c3, and finally a6. Daniel, one of the only players these days who still plays the Najdorf almost exclusively as black versus 1e4. Now, in this game, Magnus goes for the absolute main line, the absolute strongest line versus the Najdorf, and that is f3, heading for the English attack. The idea is you go bishop e3, bishop e3, queen d2, long castles, and then launch these pawns up the board like this, intending g5, h5, and g6, just going for the attack. Now, in the game, Daniel, he goes e5, breaking the center, driving back this knight. Now b3 is about the only good square for that knight. Knight b3 is the move. Bishop e6, bishop e3. And from here, both sides, their plan is simple. White here is most likely going to castle on the queen side with queen d2 and long castles. Black most likely on the king side with bishop e7 and short castles. And from there, both sides simply launch their pawns up the board as soon as they can, going for attacks on opposite sides of the board. So we have bishop e7, queen d2, castles, and both sides are ready for the attack. So how will Daniel start the attack? The main move here for black is b5, intending pretty much the fastest possible b4. Actually, sorry, knight bd7 is the main move, followed by b5, b4, and so on. Instead, Daniel goes for a completely different idea, one that is arguably a lot weaker and not seen as often. That is the move a5 here, pushing the a pawn. That is pretty much all grandmasters do these days in high-level chess, pushing the rook pawns down the board. And the idea is black is threatening a4, pushing back this knight, and then maybe even a3, trying to get the pawn on the a3 square, forcing weaknesses in the white camp, either b takes or b3, either way. There are going to be some huge gaping holes on the queen side here. Now, from here, what should white be doing? Well, the best move here by far, the automatic response, I'm sure Magnus knows this, is the move a4, clamping down on that a pawn. Instead, Magnus goes g4, pushing the g pawn, and this is where things get wild. He knows this move is not the best, but he plays it anyway. That is just how he rolls. Now, Daniel, a4 is the move, driving back that knight. It goes all the way back to the a1 square, a terrible square for that knight. I mean, arguably the worst square for any knight in the game of chess. And now the key move, a3. He pushes the alpha 0 pawn all the way down to the a3 square. And what can white do? If you take the pawn, you have these giant holes in the queen side. Or if you go b3, that pawn lives and is a permanent wedge aiming down on the b2 square. In the game, Magnus here, he goes b3. But look at this pawn on the a1 square. It is now literally entombed by its own pawns. You don't see that very often. All right, Daniel. Knight c6 is the move, developing, and now g5. Magnus playing as aggressively as humanly possible. Now, instead of that, the move knight b5 may have been a little bit stronger, targeting d6, the very weak pawn on the d6 square. Instead, g5 played immediately, driving back that knight, and now we have knight d7. The knight travels over to the queen side, eyeing squares like b6 and c5. Although going to h5 may have been a little bit stronger, that is kind of the standard square here in response to g5 in the Najdorf. The idea being on h5, it does blockade this pawn, making it harder for white to go h4, h5, then g6 like that. Instead, knight d7 played in the game, and then Magnus, he jumps into d5, the very big square, jumping into the hole on d5. Now we have bishop takes, e takes, knight d4. Daniel jumping in, a very aggressive move, seemingly giving up this pawn on d4. However, it is a poison pawn. If you take, and then take, the pawn on g5 falls as well, and white's entire position instantly crumbles. So, instead, the GOAT, he knows that. He takes once, but not twice. Bishop takes, e takes, and then f4, reinforcing the pawn on g5 before you threaten to capture on d4. All right, Daniel, in response, rook to e8 is the move, transferring the rook over to the very good e8 square. And for example, if black goes, say, bishop to f8, the rook will be very, very active here. Instead, the Ben Feingold counterattack with move f6 was a little bit stronger, named after the great grandmaster Ben Feingold. Instead, rook e8 played in the game. Then we have h4. The h-pawn marches on the board. Bishop f8. It retreats, opening up the rook. And now h5. Magnus in this game going for the most aggressive possible ideas at literally every turn. This guy is out for blood in this game. All right, Daniel. Knight c5. Jumping up. The queen takes on d4. Queen takes. And then Daniel making very, very good use of this knight. He lashes out with the rook. Rook to e4, threatening both the queen and the pawn on f4. And how is Magnus going to respond? Well, he goes back to d2. Queen d2, a good defensive move. And then rook c8, the rook lining up on the c-file with the white king on c1. Daniel so far playing very, very well. All right, Magnus, he does not like this rook one bit. No, he does not. King b1 is the move, sliding off the semi-open c-file. Now here, Daniel, the key move in this position is just astonishingly hard to find. And if you like puzzles, pause the video right now and try to find the key idea for Daniel right here. This one is just ridiculously hard. Comment down below if you think you see it right now before I go any further. All right, the move here for Daniel that he has to find to make full use of his game is h6. This is absurd. It is a deflection pawn sacrifice. The idea being, if white takes on h6, then you fly into f6 with the queen, threatening mate on b2. The entire idea, you're trying to remove this pawn from g5, where it does control f6, so you can go queen f6, threatening b2 mate. Really absurd stuff. Instead, queen b6 is the move here, sliding over to the queen side with the queen. However, this move is significantly weaker, as now the queen is so far away from this diagonal, and that is really what black should be trying to pull off here. Instead, in the game, rook h3 is the move. The rook lift on the third rank, covering all of these squares on the queen side. Now, h6, Daniel finding the key idea, but maybe one move too late. All right, Magnus, c4, pushing the pawn, getting the very interesting pawn. What is it? What do you call this formation? The connect 4 pawn formation right here. Then we have h takes, f takes, and then rook g4. The rook slides over and pressures this pawn very interestingly. The idea being, if white goes g6, then black can take twice like that and win the pawn. Now, we have knight c2. The knight finally getting back into the game. That is the idea of c4 played right here. I mean, first of all, reinforcing all these pawns, but second of all, finally giving the knight some square to go to on the c2 square. So fast forward, knight c2 played. Then we have knight to e4, jumping in and pressuring the queen. Now here, queen to e2 is played, pressuring the knight and the rook. But overall, queen e3 was a slightly better square for the queen, offering the queen trade. Now, Daniel, he instantly punishes this mistake. Queen to g1. Daniel flying down into enemy territory with the queen, making full use of the placement of the queen on b6 on the prior move. Now, here, we have g6. Magnus, again, going all out for the attack. Rook to e8 is the move, lining up the rook with the queen and potentially threatening ideas like knight c3. Now, currently, knight c3 is no good. For example, here, it's no good as the rook very importantly controls c3. However, if black goes rook e8, c3 hits with check, and then black can win the queen. So here, white's got to do something about this threat. In the game, Magnus, queen to f3 is the move, sliding out of the way of the attack. Then we have f takes, h takes, and then rook takes g6. Magnus giving up his pawn to open up more lines against the enemy king. Now, with queen to h5, threatening ideas like queen h7 and queen to h8, but will those be enough? Daniel, rook to e5, hits the queen immediately. Then we have queen h7, hits the king, king f7, and then bishop to e2, threatening bishop h5 with the pin on the rook to the king. However, here, Daniel, He spots the flaw with this plan. It's too slow, and now knight d2 check. The knight jumps in, sacrificing himself seemingly. However, the rook on d1 is pinned to the king. Therefore, rook takes is not a legal move, making this a fantastic idea. We have king c1, then rook takes. Daniel winning seemingly a free piece here. All right, queen to h5. The queen slides back and threatens the rook and pins this rook to the king on f7. Now queen to g2, queen to f5 check. Magnus here, he is down a full piece. Daniel is literally up a full piece in this game. All right, king g8. The king slides back. Queen d3, as does the queen. And here, Daniel, despite being up a full piece, he makes an absolutely absurd mistake here. I mean absurd. He's got 14 seconds left. He's feeling the heat. And here, he plays the move, knight takes b3. Just giving up his piece for almost nothing here. All right, white takes back. Queen takes. And then rook to f6. The rook slides over. Now rook c3. Magnus here doing everything he can to defend his very vulnerable king on the queen side. Now rook f to f2. Daniel lining up. It's not quite the Alekhines gun, but it's certainly a very powerful formation here with those two rooks and the queen. And by the way, the Alekhines gun is where you have the rook and then the queen and then the rook. So it's a little bit different. But anyways, c5 played in the game. Magnus here doing everything he can to fight back. His entire position is basically on the verge of collapse. If black can just go, say, bishop e7 to g5, hit the king, and get the attack going, he's going to win. Easy peasy lemon squeeze. Magnus here, the only thing he can do to fight back is this move c5, trying desperately to get a pass pawn on the queen side. Now Daniel, bishop e7 is the move, the right idea. But Magnus, he is not slowing down. He goes c6, trying to get the pass pawn on the queen side. Now Daniel, bishop g5, hits the king on c1. The king slides over, and now here Daniel makes the fatal mistake of the game. All you have to do right here is rook to f1, threatening this rook, and you pretty much win the game on the spot as the alpha 0 pawn on a3 cuts off the king, and the king will be effectively mated on the back rank. Now, instead of that, Daniel, he goes back with the bishop to f6. Now, this looks logical. After all, you pressured the rook. You still have all of these pieces piling up pressure on the knight, on the back rank, and so on. But here, Magnus, he ignores everything, and he pushes the pass pawn. c7, making it a pass pawn, threatening c8, promoting to a queen. And suddenly, Magnus here, despite being down the entire time, he somehow found a way to push this pawn all the way up to c6 and now c7, and suddenly he's winning. Daniel, he takes on c3, but Magnus, c8, promotes to a queen with check. The king goes to h7. We have queen c takes c3, rook to f1. Magnus here, he's got two freaking queens. Queen d3 hits the king. Rook to e4. Rook takes, queen takes. And Magnus suddenly has two queens versus the rook. How does this guy do it? b5, queen d to d3, b4, queen takes, and finally, being down literally two queens and the knight, Daniel is forced to resign on the spot to Magnus with 1 second left on the clock. I mean, absurd stuff for like pretty much the entire game. Daniel just completely dominating. He literally sacks the knight and he's still ahead until finally in this position, Magnus here, with nothing else left to try, he pushes c5, then c6, and then suddenly, after this blunder, c7, and he finds a way to win the game. I mean, really absurd stuff by the GOAT right here. All right, Chess YouTube, that is all for this video right here. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, comment down below and smash that like button. And that is it. So, as always, I wish you the best of luck in your chess improvement journey in 2025 and beyond. And I'll see you in the next video.